Think you're doing a great job as a leader? You might be, but how do you actually know? Today, we're talking about the feedback leaders desperately need but rarely ask for, why trust is plummeting when leaders don't listen, and the exact framework to get honest feedback from your team without creating awkwardness or defensiveness. Welcome to We've All Done It, the podcast for leaders who know they've screwed up and are ready to fix it fast. I'm Kimberly, author, speaker, leadership coach, and Southern girl living outside of Washington, D.C. Here's what I believe. Every leader faces challenges and makes mistakes, but you don't need years of therapy-style coaching to fix them. You need someone to help you figure out what's actually going wrong, make smart adjustments, and get back on track quickly. That's exactly what I do through one-on-one coaching, targeted skill development, and group programs. Every episode of this podcast delivers real talk about common leadership pitfalls, practical strategies for recovery, and no BS guidance to improve how you lead yourself and others every single day. Whether you're here to listen and learn or ready to work together and make real changes, you are in the right place. Now let's get to today's episode. Welcome back, everybody. How are you doing today? How are we surviving? I don't know about you. The world feels a little bit crazy right now. So let's just add to that craziness with our topic. Today, I want to talk about feedback. And it's not the kind that you give. I'm talking about the kind that you receive, particularly as a leader. So here's what I know. In every conversation I have, I know trust is plummeting in workplaces. And the only way that we as leaders can really understand why that's happening is leaders need feedback to figure out what has to improve, who needs to improve. But here's the catch. Feedback only actually works, though, if we actually do something with the information we receive. With action, real conversation. So let's talk about this. Trust in leadership goes hand in hand with the feedback we receive and what we do. They're inseparable. So if you want your team to trust you more, we have to talk about your feedback. Now, I don't often throw out a ton of statistics, but I want to start with a statistic today because I think it's really, really important in talking about how things have shifted in the last 5 or so years. So research has shown that trust in leadership has dropped from about 46% in 2022 to just 29% in 2024. That's nearly cut everything in half in 2 years. So I really want you to let that sink in for a second. Less than a third of employees trust leadership right. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably sitting here and saying, well, it probably has something to do with return to work policies or, hiring freezes or reductions in force or the layoff. There's a lot of reasons why it could be. Well, here's the thing. The only way we know why that trust shift has happened, where we are missing the mark and the needs of our team, is through something really simple. Feedback. We have to ask the question, why do they feel this way? And we have to be willing to sit with the answer because the truth of it is we're probably doing something that's not 100% great. We might be doing something wrong. We might be screwing up. And more importantly, we may not be owning up to something, even though it wasn't our fault or didn't go as we planned, but we still have to own that role. But the truth of it is we can't know what we need to do. We can't know what action to take if we don't actually know the problem, which begins with us, never asking the right questions. And the thing is we know that when leaders ask for feedback in a consistent fashion, the results speak for themselves. So the same surveying that shows that trust is faltering also shows that when companies create consistent, continual feedback systems, that there is an increase in trust. For instance, there's a 30% reduction in turnover, meaning people stay and employee satisfaction actually goes up. That's huge, 30%. Think about the shift in the other direction. And that's all because real people are staying in real jobs because they felt heard and valued with the information they shared. All right, so we know now why it matters. But we're going to get into an uncomfortable truth about why a lot of people don't ask for feedback. It's plain and simple. It's uncomfortable. It can be really uncomfortable. And I'm speaking from personal experience. You don't know what's going to come back at you, right? And the truth is frequently you're going to hear things that you may not want to hear. You may discover that you are showing up in a way that is not how you intended, or it's not how you think you're showing up is not how your team actually experiences you. You may find out that something you were incredibly proud of, your team absolutely hates, or they just fundamentally see it differently. And the thing is that discomfort is exactly why you need to do it. Because without feedback, you're just guessing. You're kind of walking around in your echo chamber of one. You're operating on a lot of assumptions about how you're doing instead of actual information and actual data. And let me be clear, whether you ask your team or not, whether if you don't, your team has a lot of opinions about your leadership. And I can guarantee you they are talking about it amongst themselves, maybe amongst other people in the company, other teams. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to be a part of that conversation or do you want to be left out? And I appreciate there may be times you want to be left out, but that's the chicken way. As a leader, which is part of the responsibility of leadership, is you have to be willing to embrace that uncomfortable conversation and face yourself in a mirror that you might have to do things differently in order to get the work done. Okay, so we now understand we have to do this. And so this is the trickier part. So let's say you're in a position where you're like, maybe I'm not doing this the way I think I should, or I could do it better. So how do we actually get truth from our team? Because that can be difficult. And it is tricky. So in order to get candid feedback, you have to have an environment on your team, a culture on your team that allows your team to feel safe enough to tell you the truth. And I can tell you right now, if you've never asked for feedback in your typical one-on-ones or anything outside of the engagement survey, it is going to be awkward at first. And that's why I want to help you. We're going to talk about some ways that you can structure this a little bit differently to start this process, particularly if you don't have something consistently set. So the first thing I would want you to do is you need to do some self-reflection. I do this all the time. When I was leading my teams, this was something I constantly felt myself, questions I was asking myself, and these are things that I want you to really think of. So here are the things I want you to think of. What kind of relationship do you have with your team? What do you think your relationship is? And if you have any hesitation, then that means you probably don't know. And if your gut is my relationship with my team is great, well, we're going to figure that out, right? So do you know what your relationship is? Then the second thing I would ask you to really think critically is, if you were to ask for feedback today, would they feel comfortable telling you the truth? Would they fear your reaction if they said something you might not like? And I really think about that. How would you respond? And think about examples, like when your team has come to you with information that you weren't happy about. How did you respond to them? That is going to be pivotal in laying the foundation for creating the culture for candidness. Because without the candidness, you're not really going to get anything that's going to be super meaningful. So we really want to focus on creating this environment. So no matter where you land with the questions, that's a good place to start because you kind of need to know your foundation. So if you have a pretty good culture, awesome. If you don't have a great culture, we're going to have more work to do. But either way, the next step is what I would encourage you to do. So in order for you to set yourself up for success and your team up for success is you need to tell them that something is changing. You want to set the standard that you're about to start asking these questions, right? So whether it's a suggestion box, whether it's an anonymous survey that is a real anonymous survey, or it's just an additional question you ask in your regular touch bases or one-on-ones with your team, let them know what you're about to do and tell them the why of the change. So I'm going to give you an example, like a sample, how it may sound could be something like, I'm trying to become a better leader for this team. And the only way I can do that is if I'm hearing from you in what's working and what's not working. So starting next week, I'm going to ask each of you in our regular one-on-ones, what is one thing I can do differently to better support you? And just so you know, like, I want you to feel comfortable giving me an honest answer. And I promise there's going to be no consequence. Like, tell me the truth. Like, there's no consequences, but I need to hear from you. What is one thing I can do better to support you? That's it. The template of what you ask can be that simple. What you say, how you set the standard can be that easy. What I want you to notice is I didn't say anything about asking a question like, how am I doing? It's an awful question. It's too broad. It's too vague. And candidly, it kind of is a little uncomfortable as well, because it almost is like you're seeking somebody to say, you're doing great. No, you want something that's more specific. You want to ask questions that lead to an action. So if you didn't like the question in that one, here's some other ways that you can state a question you can add into a one-on-one or an anonymous survey or in some capacity, right? In however you're seeking. So you could say, what's one thing I'm doing that's helpful to you? What's one thing, when have you felt most supported? When have you felt least supported? And the one that I actually like, because I think it gets into blind spots, which we all have them. There's no judgment here. We all have blind spots. The one question I feel very strongly about is there something I do that inadvertently makes your job harder? So again, notice these are very specific questions to get specific, actionable answers. You want to be able to, again, get out. You don't want to focus on emotion. You want to focus on action. What are you doing as a boss, as a leader, that is either helping or hindering your team in doing their work? At the core, that is what you're trying to understand. Now, you institute this. You're getting information back. Wonderful. Wonderful. And understand that this might take some time, right? For people to maybe give you more substantive answers. You might feel like some of them are superficial. But here's what I want you to do. Regardless of what you get, here's what you do next in the process. Because this is where people kind of screw up. It's where they ask for feedback, they get it, and then they either get really defensive about it or they don't do anything. We're not going to do that. We're going to go a different route. We are going to take different action. So the first thing we're going to do as soon as we ask for this is we're simply just going to listen. This is a moment where you need to get incredibly curious. Just simply listen to what they are saying. You don't have to respond in the moment. Again, don't defend yourself. Don't try to explain yourself. Simply take in whatever they are sharing with you. If you need to ask clarifying questions, absolutely. But make sure that this interaction is more about learning than it is about respect. And what I want you to be very aware of is when they are done, to say thank you, regardless of what is shared. Again, you're not saying that what they said is truth. What you are saying is thank you for sharing this with me. Thank you for telling me what is true for you, how it feels for you. That easy. It sounds easy, but it's not, because especially if you're getting something back that you really don't agree with or feels very attacking, you're going to want to attack. Do not do that. The next thing I want you to do after you say, thank you for sharing this with me, is to make sure that you are careful about what you promise. Because the last thing you want to do is make promises you can't keep. So, what I want you to do is instead of like promising to make a change or promising to immediately go take action, is I want you to say something more along the lines of, I appreciate what you've shared. I want to reflect on it. And then what I'd like to do is come back and share with you what actions I'm going to take. Because what this does is it gives you permission to sit in it a little bit. You don't have to make a promise in an emotional state because you might be in an emotional state. You don't want, again, to dig a hole for yourself when you're actually trying to figure out how to get out of it. But if you promise that you're going to reflect on it and take an action, then you actually have to do that. You need to follow up, make sure you're coming back around in your next one-on-one, and make sure there's time on that agenda to let them know what you're planning to do and how you're following up with the information they shared. Now, I've said this a couple of times, and I want to talk about it a little more in-depthly, is when we get stuff back that isn't complimentary, it's really hard, right? And we're human, and a natural reaction might be that you get angry, that you get defensive, that you want to like try to defend yourself, prove that what they're saying isn't right. And here's a couple things that I want to make sure that you never lose sight of, is that perception is reality for your team. So even if you didn't intend to do something or something happened that was outside of your control, the impact is real. Even if you had the best of intention and it went sideways, the impact is real. You can't argue someone out of their experience, right? Like this is how they're experiencing. You're trying to understand that so that you can figure out how to close the gap. But you're not necessarily needing to close the gap in that, right? But understand that perception is reality for your team. And you need to understand what their perception is. I would also encourage you to, in these moments when the feedback is not great, right? And you're hearing things that you really are struggling with, I want you to stop and ask yourself, is there even a schmitten of truth? Is there even a tiny bit of kernel of truth in anything that they're sharing? Maybe like you don't agree with 90% of it, but is there 10% in there that you're like, okay, I see it? Because even if there's the smallest amount of truth in something they're giving you, no matter how uncomfortable it is, you now have something very meaningful to go take action. You now have a focus that you two can align with. And that in and of itself is incredibly important. So again, remember, just because you're sitting in the discomfort in this moment doesn't mean you immediately have to go into action. I encourage you to actually go slower. Think about it, reflect on it, journal, talk to maybe a mentor, a sponsor, a trusted colleague, a coach. Really take the time to think through what has been shared, where is there some truth in it, and then what do you actually want to do next about it? What steps are the next best steps in actually addressing this issue? And that leads us to the next part, which is you got to do something with what they tell you, right? And again, not that I'm saying you have to do something immediately in that session or immediately the next day, but you have to show action from what you have received. Because I can tell you, if you ask for the feedback and then you do nothing with it, it's almost worse than never asking for feedback at all. Because all it looks like you've done is like check a box or you're going through the motions. And what that is going to do is not only is that going to continue to destroy trust with your team, it is going to rapidly amp up the cynicism, right? That you're not serious. You're not taking them seriously. So why did you make them go through the effort of telling you something truthful if you're not going to at least do something about it, or at least address it in a really meaningful way? So again, once you get this, I want you to really think through in your reflection process is decide what you're going to take action on. And again, you don't have to change everything, but you need to do something. You have to take some kind of action, no matter how small, to show that you heard them and that you understand a shift needs to take place. You need to communicate to your team that you're going to do this. It's not just doing it. It's the two. It's the communication and the doing. The say-do ratio, as they used to say. Let your team see that their feedback actually mattered. It is imperative. It is critical that they see that when they were vulnerable with you and told you the truth, that you did something with it, especially if it was something that was difficult for you to hear, right? Because it shows that you're willing to be very open-minded about what's coming at you and take it very seriously and not just dig further into your own corner. And then lastly, what I want you to do is continue to check back with your team. Check in, see if they're noticing a difference. Be willing to make more adjustments, because this is how you build trust. It's not about being perfect. It is about being willing to listen, learn, and actually shift your own behavior. So look, I'm going to tell you right now, I honestly think sometimes getting feedback is harder than giving feedback. And because it's never easy to hear that we're not getting it right, especially when in these times when for many of us as leaders, we are working longer and harder than we ever have in our career. And so to be told that we're still not getting it done is really difficult. But it's necessary. No differently than it's necessary for your team to be successful and you giving feedback. It's necessary for you to build the culture on your team that you want and to actually be the leader that you really want to be. I firmly believe you cannot lead a team in a vacuum. You need the input, you need the perspective. You need to know how your leadership is actually landing with people you are leading. And the only way to do that, the only way to know, is you have to ask, sit and truly listen, and then do something with what you hear. So here's my challenge to you. This week, I want you to ask one person on your team, just one, for one specific piece of feedback. You can use some of the questions I shared earlier. I want you to listen without defending, say thank you, reflect, and then follow up. That's it. Start small, but start. And feel free to start with someone that you feel is safe. Because candidly, they probably are going to give you the more direct and cut to the core feedback. But start. In whatever way feels best for you, but start. All right, y'all. I just want to say thank you and remind you again, leading is hard. Not everybody's cut out to be a leader. We know this. But if you're in this role or you aspire to be in this kind of a role where you are leading others, these are some of the things we have to do that are not the fun part of the job, but are absolutely necessary. Okay, everyone, until next time, take care, stay sane, and hit me up in an email. Let me know how you guys are doing. Talk soon. I've got two things before I let you go. One, if you've ever gotten any value from the show, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps and absolutely makes my day. The second thing is if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with me, please shoot me an email at podcast@KimberlyJBenoit.com. I'd love to hear from you. All right, see you in the next episode.